With all 8 episodes of The Mandalorian Season 2 out, we now have 16 total episodes of The Mandalorian. In this video, I'm gonna rank all 16 episodes of The Mandalorian from worst to best. Also, at the end of the video, I will explain how you guys can get involved and vote for your favorite episodes of The Mandalorian. But before I continue on with the video, only about 29.5% of my viewers are subscribed to my channel. So if you do end up enjoying this video, consider subscribing, and if you don't enjoy the video, then obviously you do not need to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much, and let's continue on with the video. At number 16, we have Chapter 4, Sanctuary. This episode was a fine episode that does progress the plot somewhat. We get a hint of how unsafe the galaxy is for Baby Yoda, and why Mando cannot just leave Baby Yoda on some random planet. It introduced Cara Dune, who's a badass, but it has very little rewatchability for me. I do like the character of the Widow, and I wouldn't mind seeing her again in the future. For me, the hardest aspect of this episode is to take the ATST seriously, and that might not be fair of me, but after watching Ewoks take out an ATST like it's nothing in Return of the Jedi, it makes it hard for me to see the ATST as threatening. Even though it's my least favorite episode, I definitely don't think it's the worst. At number 15, we have Chapter 5, The Gunslinger. This is not a good episode, it is the definition of filler. But I would be lying if I said I didn't have fun watching it. Seeing the landscape of Tatooine again was really cool. This episode did a great job of making Tatooine a really beautiful planet. It was cool seeing Ming-Na Wen again in Star Wars, although it's unfortunate that she had to die, but thank God she came back in Season 2. The most controversial part of this episode was Taro Calican. He definitely wasn't a good character, but I didn't entirely hate him. I actually somewhat related to his character, and if he hadn't died, I wouldn't mind seeing him again. Even though this is number 15, I do think it's the worst episode of the series. I'd just rather watch this than Chapter 4. At number 16, we have Chapter 10, The Passenger. In my opinion, this was the only episode of Season 2 that wasn't great. To me, even though this episode is not filler, it does feel like an entire detour. I did like the entire feel of this episode, that it kind of felt like a horror movie. Frog Lady is a great character, and I wish we got a little more of her. Seeing just an ordinary person in the galaxy was really refreshing. We also got a hint of the Rangers of the New Republic, which was neat. Overall, it was a fine episode, but not great. At number 13, we have Episode 2, The Child. This episode was a fun episode. We get to see the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda grow. I think this episode is very important because we need to see that relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda fleshed out in order for Episode 3 to work. I also love how Mando fell off the sandcrawler and just hit the ground really hard. It reminded me of how hard you guys should be smashing the like button if you haven't already. My favorite aspect of this episode is that we get more of Quill. Quill is my favorite character from all of The Mandalorian, and I love seeing him. There's some really good character development in this episode that makes his inevitable death really depressing. Overall, it's a side story that I think is fine. It's not great, but it's definitely not bad by any means. At number 12, we have Chapter 12, The Siege. This is where I think we start getting into the good episodes. I thought this episode had a lot of great humor and action. I like seeing the Season 1 cast back and the way they interact with each other. I love getting a better look at the Empire and learning they are indeed trying to clone Baby Yoda. I think that's all I could really say about this episode. It was just a lot of fun, but there was nothing more to it than that. At number 11, we have Chapter 11, The Heiress. This episode was a lot of fun. I love the opening when the Frog Lady found her husband. It was just so wholesome. But of course, the highlight of this episode was seeing Bo-Katan. Seeing a prominent character from the Clone Wars for the first time in live action is so cool. Seeing these 4 Mandalorians fight through the ship at the end was really cool, and I think it was cooler than Chapter 3 in Season 1. We also get a little more world building with the Mandalorians, which is great. Learning that Mando was a part of Death Watch was really important and really fun to learn. Overall, just like Chapter 12, this episode was a lot of fun. At number 10, we have Episode 7, The Reckoning. This episode was mostly set up for the finale, however, it's done really well. We get to see the crew come together, which is where I think The Mandalorian is at its best. Here we get the reintroduction of IG-11, who is also one of my favorite characters. This episode has a fantastic death scene at the end, and I honestly think it is one of the best death scenes in Star Wars. Unfortunately, this episode is mostly just set up, and it's not one that is really memorable for me, and it doesn't stand on its own. Overall, it is still a great episode. At number 9, we have Chapter 3, The Sin. This episode is a masterclass in expressing emotion through a helmet and has some fantastic dialogue. It does get a little slow at times, but I really do think it's a fantastic episode. Seeing Deborah Chow's work here makes me so excited for the Obi-Wan show because she will be the one directing every episode of that series. Seeing all the Mandalorians fly out and help Mando is something I didn't know I needed in my life. This episode is arguably the most important episode of the season, besides maybe the pilot. If we don't buy the relationship between Mando and Baby Yoda, then this series doesn't work. However, this episode is fantastic, and thus I think this series is fantastic. At number 8, we have Chapter 6, The Prisoner. This episode can be considered filler, but it is just so damn fun. All the characters that are a part of this crew are so interesting. Bill Burr is great, and it's a great setup for his episode in Season 2. I also love the Twi'lek too because she is just crazy. We also get some badass fight scenes with Mando that make him basically Batman in Star Wars. This episode really fleshes out Mando and some of the morals he has. When he's in the situation with the New Republic officer, we see how Mando doesn't like killing innocent people. This episode should be lower on my list, but I have way too much fun watching it. At number 7, we have Chapter 15, The Believer. I was a little bit harsher on this episode when it came out, but I definitely had a change of heart. Bill Burr's Mayfeld was easily the highlight of this episode. He is just so amusing to watch, and I love his banter with Mando. He also gave one of the best performances in this show when he was talking to the Imperial officer. However, for me the best part of the episode was seeing Mando take off his helmet. It just shows how much he cares for Grogu, and it was great storytelling. This is also the only episode in the series without Grogu, which was very neat. This episode is full of action and great storytelling, which is why it is number 7. At number 6, we have Episode 1, The Mandalorian. This pilot is just so damn good. It introduces the characters perfectly, it introduces this world perfectly, and we get some really fun action. I think this episode should be taught when it comes to making a good pilot. I love this episode a lot, and it is probably the best pilot we have in Star Wars. I love the sequence at the end. I think it is a perfect combination of action and fun. I think this episode is criminally underrated, and Dave Filoni, the director, doesn't get enough credit. At number 5, we have Chapter 14, The Tragedy. This episode surprised me on so many levels. I thought this would be a filler episode, but seeing it actually have serious consequences was great. I loved the action with Boba Fett and Fennec Shand. Even though I'm not the biggest Boba Fett fan, it was cool to see him get his armor back. Seeing Grogu get captured by the Empire was so stressful. This episode basically exists to take everything away from Mando that matters the most to him, including the Razor Crest, which was a huge shock. For me, there was not a single dull moment in this episode, and that is why it is number 5. At number 4, we have Chapter 13, The Jedi. Obviously, the highlight of this episode is that after 12 years, we finally get to see Ahsoka Tano in live action. Rosario Dawson did a fantastic job, and it makes me so excited for the Ahsoka series coming out in a few years. I love the overall feel of this episode. It was a mix of both samurai and western, which is a great combo. Also, finally getting more info about Baby Yoda and his past was great. This episode has such a high rewatchability for me, and I love it so much. At number 3, we have Chapter 9, The Marshal. This episode is weird for me because it's hard to put into words why I love it so much. I think the main reason why would be because of Cobb Vanth. With the exception of Quill, he is easily my favorite supporting character in the show. Again, I can't put my finger on it, but he was so charismatic and fun to watch. The ending sequence of this episode was amazing. It really showed off the higher budget for the season, and it paid off definitely. This is probably the most rewatchable episode of the whole series for me, and I think it was a fantastic start to Season 2. At number 2, we have Chapter 8, Redemption. This episode is perfect and so much more. We get an excellent look at all our characters, we get powerful payoffs to season-long arcs, and it sets up Season 2 perfectly. The way Mando grows an emotional attachment to IG-11 is an amazing character arc, and I think it is also very underrated. I do wish the fight with Moff Gideon was a little longer, but it's the most minor complaint that I have about this episode. This is easily my favorite episode of Season 1, and it has a very high rewatchability factor for me. And at number 1, with no surprise, we have Chapter 16, The Rescue. I feel like there isn't much for me to say, because most people already seem to love the hell out of this episode. I thought the action was great, especially with the 4 women marching through the cruiser. The fight with Mando and Moff Gideon was also really tense and well choreographed. Obviously, the highlight for most people was seeing Luke Skywalker go full-on Vader on a bunch of Dark Troopers, which I admit, it was awesome. But easily the best part of this episode for me was the last scene between Mando and Grogu. I made a whole video on why I think this scene is amazing, so go check it out. This is easily one of the best scenes in all of Star Wars, and I can't help but get emotional every time I watch it. This is easily the best episode of the series. And that is my ranking of the 16 episodes of The Mandalorian. As I said earlier, there is a way where you guys can get involved and vote for your favorite episodes of The Mandalorian. I created a Google Form sheet with all 16 episodes of The Mandalorian, and you can vote for your favorite ones. On Wednesday, December 30th, I will release the results of the poll, and you guys can see which are people's favorite episodes of The Mandalorian. By the way, the winner of my last shoutout was Lego Ghost Host, so congratulations on noticing the Claude Easter egg. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday. Don't forget to unite the Claude Squad, and I'll see you guys next time.